I am not going to take a back seat to J.D. Vance on law enforcement or anything else for that matter. The fact that on January 6th, we had 140 cops, United States Capitol Police, get injured during the insurrection when they tried to overthrow the government, beat them upside the head with lead pipes, spray them with pepper spray. The one video we saw, the cop got jammed into the door, right? J.D. Vance raised money for the legal defense fund of the insurrectionists. This is the kind of extremism, J.D., that we wholly reject. You have video posts. Don't even try to deny it. We got your Twitter posts and everything else. Everybody's seen it. He said, help these guys with their legal defense fund. Now, can you imagine one guy saying out of one side of his mouth he's pro-cop, and out of the other side of his mouth he's raising money for the insurrectionists who were beating up the Capitol Police? The one guy he tried to raise money for got 4 years in prison. This is ridiculous. I'm not taking a back seat to you. I brought $500 million back to fund police in Ohio.
And that is how it's done. Hi, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in New York. 4 weeks from right now, the American people will take part in the first major election in our country since the deadly assault on the U.S. Capitol. And Tim Ryan may very well be onto something there. For so many Republicans, not just his opponent, J.D. Vance, there remains a wide and shameful chasm between what they say they support and who they say they support, and what their inability to fully condemn January 6th and the big lie behind it actually means. Many of these Republicans appear to have developed a penchant for saying one thing in private, another in public. Exhibit 1A, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. There's more brand new reporting today in the Washington Post detailing a scoop from the upcoming book, Unchecked, the untold story behind Congress's botched impeachments of Donald Trump. In the weeks following Trump's acquittal, McCarthy apparently exploded at Republican Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler for publicly revealing a contentious January 6 phone call between McCarthy and Trump. On that particular tirade, which both politicians deny ever happened, we'll let the Post take it from here. Quote, I alone am taking all the heat to protect people from Trump. I alone am holding the party together. McCarthy yelled at Representative Jamie Herrera Butler during a previously undisclosed meeting in McCarthy's office on February 25th, 2021. Quote, I have been working with Trump to keep him from going after Republicans like you and blowing up the party and destroying all our work, end quote. Stunned by McCarthy's anger, Congresswoman Herrera Butler began to cry. Through tears, she apologized for not telling him ahead of time that she had confirmed to the media details of a call McCarthy made to Trump on January 6, 2021, urging him to tell his supporters to leave the U.S. Capitol. Quote, you should have come to me, McCarthy said. Why did you go to the press? This is no way to thank me. What did you want me to do? Lie? Herrera Butler shot back. I did what I thought was right, end quote. Of course he wanted you to lie. And then there's Lindsey Graham, another Republican who later joined the endeavor to whitewash January 6 in earnest. Former D.C. police officer Michael Fanone says in a meeting with officers who responded to the attack, Graham told them this, quote, you guys should have shot them all in the head. We gave you guys guns and you should have used them. I don't understand why that didn't happen, end quote. Of course, those guys were Trump supporters. It brings us back to the midterms. In 4 weeks, Americans will have to decide whether to support or reject politicians like McCarthy and Graham, who were evidently so critical of Donald Trump in the hours and days following the insurrection, only to so quickly fall back in line behind the twice impeached, disgraced ex-president. It's where we begin the hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Jason Johnson is here. He's a politics and journalism professor at Morgan State University, the host of A Word with Jason Johnson. He's also an MSNBC contributor. Also with us, Haley B. Miller, politics reporter for the USA Today network in Ohio. And with me at the table, Basil Smikle, Democratic strategist and director of the public policy program at Hunter College. I always start with anyone that has the, the ability comes to the table because I love it. What do you, I mean, that Tim Ryan response was so good. It was so strong. And why not make abundantly clear you cannot be pro-cop and pro-whitewash.
That's why I actually take some of what Bernie Sanders said in his op-ed about not letting abortion be the only thing that Democrats run on in this cycle. It has to be front and center. There's no question about it. But listen to Tim Ryan. We cannot lose the debate over who supports law enforcement to those guys, to that Republican. We cannot lose that debate. Wes Moore, who's running for governor of Maryland, talks the same way. If you read what, the reports of Herschel Walker getting this evangelical vote in Georgia and talking about grace in his campaign, we cannot lose that vote either. That's why I love that Raphael Warnock understands what James Cone talked about in the black theology of liberation, that we should be social justice warriors. I want that guy winning in this election. And the concern that I have, the fear that I have, is that we cannot let Republicans beat us on some of these issues that we are standing tall on. We Democrats are standing tall on. So that's why with Tim Ryan, I want to see Democrats support his race. There are reports that they're not. That's concerning. And my message
Tell me more about that.
Well, because there's a sense that, Ohio was a battleground state, and It's now not looking like that at all. And there is some concern that Democrats, D.C. Democrats, are not supporting his race with outside funding, that the burden is really on his campaign to raise the money. That's concerning.
I mean, that's terrible. There's no one more dangerous than J.D. Vance.
When you listen to Tim Ryan talk, that is the person that we need in office. And that blue-collar Democrat. If we can't elect him, we're in trouble.
Haley, take me inside how this is all playing out in Ohio among voters.
Well, to that point, Ohio has become more red over the years. And so because of that, this race is very close right now. I think strategists generally say that Tim Ryan's probably running the most effective Democratic campaign you can run in a state like this. But because of that, and going back to the issue of January 6th, he has really run a campaign on a range of issues, appealing to what he calls the exhausted majority, basically trying to get moderates, Republicans who maybe haven't supported President Trump, really to get those folks to come to the table and to support his campaign instead of Vance's.
Let me show some of J.D. Vance in talking about January 6th. This is more from the debate with Ryan and Vance. Let me show this to you, Jason Johnson.
This is the crowd that JD is running around with. The election deniers, the extremists. That's not Ohio. That's not Rob Portman. That's not George Voinovich. That's not Sherrod Brown, right? That's not for us. He's running with an extreme element here that's very, very dangerous.
First of all, Rob Portman endorsed me, of course, and I find it interesting how preoccupied you are with this at a time when people can't afford groceries, people can't afford to walk down the streets safely. Let's focus on the significant issues right now, Tim.
So, Jason, that's my insurrection is showing. Let's talk about groceries. I mean, groceries, serious, deadly serious issue for all American families, but it does not erase the need to explain your support for those who participated in the insurrection.
Yeah, Nicole, this race, and I spent a lot of time last night texting. I used to teach in Ohio, taught there for years, talked to a lot of my former students who are paying attention to it. This race is the epitome of what the challenge is for a lot of Democrats across the country. These are not issue campaigns anymore. The people who care about issues already know how they feel. If you're unhappy about the Supreme Court, you already know how you're voting about abortion. Your opinion on January 6th isn't being changed. What we're seeing in Ohio is a lot like what you're seeing in Pennsylvania, somewhat what you're seeing in a place like Georgia. It's about personality. It's about authenticity. If you notice when Tim Ryan was attacking J.D. Vance, J.D. Vance's greatest issue has always been he's kind of a poser. People don't really believe him. They think he's phony. He switched from one side to the other. And you notice when Tim Ryan attacks him, he's like, hey, everybody who I know, back in Youngstown, where Ed O'Neill is from, the guy, Bundy from Married with Children. Everybody in my high school wouldn't let somebody like Trump take their dignity, on national television and then buddy up with them. This is about who represents the attitude of the state and the feelings about people in the state. It ain't about policy. No one's making a policy argument this late. You already know how you feel 30 days out. Tim Ryan is running a fantastic campaign. I would argue at some level he's happy it's not a race that people are paying attention to nationally, because that's the kind of thing that gins up Republicans. But again, the state may be too red. There may be too much voter suppression for him to take over, but he ran a fantastic race. And last night's debate really hurt J.D. Vance. All the chatter on the ground is people like, that guy looks soft, and Tim Ryan looked like the kind of guy you want to get a beer with.
Well, and I mean, Jason, to your point, like Tim Ryan had the ground softened by Donald Trump, who got to the state and called J.D. Vance basically the word that Trump used. I won't use it here, but basically said, you know, you just kiss my ass. I mean, Trump got there and emasculated him, you know, so he was sort of left in rubble. And then Tim Ryan kind of came in and delivered the fatal blow by saying, you're no Rob Portman. You know, you're no George Voinovich. You're something not defensible. I mean, in a state trending red, those are some deadly political blows.
Yeah, they are. And the thing is, and you can't, the ground has been softened also by J.D. Vance himself. Look, this is the same thing that Joe Biden was able to do when he went up against Trump. J.D. Vance is the guy who left your small town, went to state college, and comes back and doesn't remember anybody's name anymore. Tim Ryan is the guy who's working at his dad's, you know, mechanic shop, right? And is still the same sort of grease monkey he has been, and is trying to go to community college. Everybody sees that guy, and nobody likes anybody like J.D. Vance. His only way of winning is by saying, I'm another vote for Mitch McConnell, because if you're talking about who's actually real Ohio from personality, attitude, and belief, it's the guy from Youngstown.
But and I would just say very quickly, that's the concern that I have. None of these folks, whether it's Vance or it's Dr. Oz or it's Herschel Walker, they're vehicles, they're vessels.
They're vessels.
That's all that they are for this sort of message and the policy and the courts. They're vessels, and that is the. If we, and I understand that, you know, it's not really a policy debate, and I get that, but in a way it also is, because
or a values thing. Like if you value owning the libs, if you value whatever their smears are, social, whatever their attack is. I know what you're saying.
Yeah,
it's like transferable.
That's exactly right. And so we just have to be, Democrats have to be mindful that it's not just a disagreement on policy. This is a conversation about values, and it is a conversation about how you want to change our government for the next generation. It is a generation.
Okay, so with that as the setup, let me show you what Adam Kinzinger is doing, because I normally wouldn't have maybe shown this to all three of you. But to this point of these guys just as vessels, when you've got prominent Republicans saying don't vote for the vessel, I want to hear your thoughts on whether this might work.
The most important thing that we can deal with in November, that we can vote on, is based on, do you actually believe in democracy? You know, look, we're going to argue tax rates forever. We're probably going to argue abortion forever, even some of those hot topics out there. But the one thing we can't continue arguing if we lose it is, are we going to be a self-governing nation? And you have so many people out there that are convincing half of the country, or trying to convince half the country, that the election system doesn't work, that their vote was stolen. Democracies and self-governance cannot survive when they live in a bed of lies. And so, you know, for me, it's look at this and say, okay, is the tax rate the most important thing? Is some, you know, false allegiance to a party that you don't even know what it stands for anymore? Is that important? Or is it defense of democracy?
So, Haley, I saw this and I actually thought about Georgia, and I wondered if this was the kind of state where chipping away at some of that red, some of that Republican margin might have an impact if this message is prominent in the final 4 weeks. Anyone talking about these attacks and these messages from within the Republican Party about the danger that J.D. Vance represents to democracy?
So there are actually some Republican groups of Republicans, you know, who are kind of more the establishment party back in the day, who are not necessarily Trump supporters, who have put some money into Ohio's race, who are kind of campaigning in their own way across the state, speaking out against Vance, saying what, you know, Kinzinger was saying just there, you know, arguing Vance is a threat to democracy because of his comments on the 2020 election, January 6th. Whether these groups have enough momentum to really make a dent in the vote in November remains to be seen, but that definitely is part of the conversation in Ohio's race.
Because a lot of those kind of Republicans that Haley's talking about are prominent former, or I don't know if some of them may still be Republicans from Ohio. Kasich was a never Trump Republican before it had its own sort of political infrastructure. Let me just put up the list of the endorsements from Adam Kinzinger, because it's interesting. It seems thoughtful from his standpoint. So Shapiro, he endorses against Mastriano. Katie Hobbs against what's her name, Carrie Lake. Raffensperger is a Republican he endorsed, who on the other end of the call with Trump refused to overturn and fined him is missing votes. The rest of them are Democrats in the governor's races. Talk, Basil, about whether you think enough attention has been paid. Von Hilliard said something on the show yesterday that haunted me all night about how if Carrie Lake and some of these deniers win, we're going to be having a conversation. We're going to be doing these live shots from places like Arizona talking about our democracy being in much worse shape.
That's right. No, I think all of these endorsements help. Absolutely right. You know, they may not work in certain areas of the country. They may only work in certain states and certain House races, but every little bit hurts. My only caution, it is not to supplement the work that Democrats should be doing on their own, to elect their own. And I say that because there's so many leaders that are running across the country. We've got many folks running for governor and Senate that are young. They are the future of the party, and if the Democratic Party,
the future of the country, the young.
That's absolutely right. And if the party can't find a way to make sure that they have their full-throated support, you're going to lose them and the voters that supported them for a very, very long time. So it's important that Kinzinger and Liz Cheney are out there supporting Democratic candidates, but it should not supplant what Democrats should be doing for us.
I just want to press you because it sounds like you're not satisfied with sort of the money and effort going into some of these tougher races. I mean, we're talking about Ohio being really hard for Democrats, and it sounds like you understand they're not pouring resources into places like that.
It's a little concerning if I'm reading reports about it, because if that's happening, that means it's far worse than what's being reported. And if you have someone like a Tim Ryan coming on Morning Joe and saying, hey, I'm representing parts of the party and representing voters that Democrats don't normally talk to. How are we supposed to get elected if you're not coming out here and supporting me? And that's concerning, because if you take away anything from Georgia 2 years ago, it's that they sent out candidates to run in races everywhere for everything. As a former party leader, one of the hardest things to do is to get folks, recruit folks to run for office in some of these rural parts of the country and in the suburbs. So we can't underestimate how important that is, not only in Georgia, but in Ohio and other states.
Jason, I'll give you the last word.
There is absolutely no way I can support anybody throwing their endorsement behind Raffensperger. Just because he told Donald Trump, I'm not going to cheat for you, doesn't mean he's not continuing to suppress the vote in the state of Georgia under all circumstances, which is why I never trust most of these never Trumpers. Raffensperger is a problem. And supporting people who believe in democracy means across the board supporters of democracy. B. Wynn is actually somebody running for Secretary of State in Georgia who cares about everybody having access to vote. If you look at anything that happened in that state in 2018 and now, where literally you didn't have power cords there in time for voting machines that happened to be in majority black areas, you can't support anybody like Raffensperger, even if he stood up to Trump and did the one right thing that you're supposed to do when your job is allowing people to have the franchise.
I mean, I'm always glad when I give you the last word, Jason. But on this program, when I asked Raffensperger about the voter suppression law, why did you need it if there was no fraud? If your thrice audited vote count yielded no voter fraud, why did you need, you call it tomato, I call it tomato, voter integrity is voter suppression. Why did you need it if there was no fraud? Right. So a well-balanced conversation.